Hi, it's Dreyer and welcome to the Financial Freedom Challenge, where our mission is basically to help you to create, to grow, to protect and to enjoy a life of abundance. And today I'd like to talk to you about the U in the R.U.L.E.R.S principle, in the acronym R.U.L.E.R.S, and we're going to focus on the U, and that basically stands for understand. In other words, we need to understand what it is that we do before we actually do it, and I think that is the lesson that I'd like to bring to you today. And I find that by far the majority of people have got no clue what they do, and therefore they do it, and then they go back and try to justify what it is that they've done, and then they start blaming other people because things did not work out the way that they thought that it would work out. Right, so the U is to understand. In 1987, I discovered something about property. I thought that I understand property because at that stage people said to me there's only three criteria to property, and that is location, location and location. But in 1987 I wanted to understand property and understand what is the investment value in a property, and can a property be investment, only to find out that there's no ways that I could do it. In other words, I had to develop a program, a system at that stage in order to be able to calculate the true growth of this. But that was not only, that was the smallest part of the problem in terms of understanding it, because I needed to understand how the system operates, because I was in the system already and I was just getting out of it, and that's the reason why I started investigating into property as an investment instrument. Right, so in '84 I discovered that my property, the house that I was staying in, is not really investment, or was not really investment. And it's because there's a split. In other words, there's the asset, but then what we do is we want to buy the asset, so we go to the bank and we say to the bank, listen, I want to buy this asset. And the bank says, no problem, what's your income? In other words, they look at your income statements, and based on that they say, okay, we'll take your income. In other words, you pledge yourself and the rest of your life, the income that you're going to earn, for the right to have something that will not belong to you, at least not for the next 20 years. But at least you can say, this is my property. And this is what I discovered when I got basically fired. When the manager said to me, I want your car keys, your wife's car keys, and I want you're going to transfer the bond from the perm into your name, and I'm going to give you till Friday, and that was on a Monday afternoon. That is when I realized for the first time that this that I thought is an asset is definitely not an asset. And the reason why it's not an asset, and this was the beginning of this understanding process of me, was simply that there was a split. You see, when I bought the property, I went to the bank. Old Mutual stood security for that. The bank then, those days it was a building society, by the way. Okay, so they took the title deed. So they control that asset. Now, that turned me into a slave immediately, because now I had to work in order to get the title deed back. Right, so the property is tied to the title deed. I think it's my property, but actually the holder of the asset, the real asset, the title deed, is the bank. And I started working. Now, those days, the interest rates were, in July that year, 24.5%. So I had to work, increase my standard of living in order to earn this additional income, in order to be able to pay the bank or the perm that amount of money. And that was all done with after-tax money. Right? So unless you understand what is value, and unless you understand what value we are talking about when you start looking at property, for example, as an income or as an asset class, you need to make sure that you understand what it is that you do. So the trick that I discovered at that stage was that I had to make damn sure that I understood the investment class. And unless I could understand that investment class, it would be a high risk. Property, as an example, has got 27 risks. And each and every one of those risks becomes more severe, especially if things start escalating and you leverage that. So immediately understand leverage, understand what it means and why there's such a thing as leverage, and how it can work against you, but also how it can really work for you, but on condition that you understand risk. So there's a couple of tips that I'd like to give you. First of all, if you don't understand yourself and know who you are and why you behave in the way that you behave, be very, very careful to invest. If you don't understand the asset class, Not what they tell you, but really and truly have a deep understanding, insight into it. In other words, have the competency. Be careful to invest. If you don't understand the risk attached to that investment class, don't invest. Okay? And by the way, if you don't know how to take 2 cents and turn it into 200,000 Rand within the next year, don't do it, and definitely do not tell the world that you know how to do it. So the question basically is, but how do I know that I understand? Well, the only way to do that is to build the competencies. If I've got the competencies, the understanding, in other words, I've got the skill, I've got the applied knowledge, and I've got the experience, then it's easy. Then I can say that I really understand, on condition that I understand all 27 variables, as well as the fundamentals about investments. What do I mean with that? I don't know if you know how the fiat system works here in South Africa. But the fiat system basically is, you go to the bank and you say, I want to buy this property. The bank says, no problem, give me your paycheck. So you prove that you do have an income. In other words, you're a slave to the system already. And because you're a slave of the system, they say, okay, we'll do it. But actually they're lying, because they do not necessarily have the funds. Okay? And very few people understand it. And this is how the fiat system operates. So what they then do is go to the Reserve Bank and say, listen, we've got a fool that has pledged the rest, he'll stay a slave to the system, and he'll become a double slave because he's going to use his income to repay us. Can you print the money for us? The Reserve Bank says, no problem. Of course, I'm putting a little bit juice to this, but the principle is the same, right? And it's right and correct, and you can go and check this. So they print the money, and they give it to the bank, of course, with a certain interest rate. We call it the repo rate, right? So the bank says, okay, I'm taking this, it is costing me money, I've got a slave that is willing to pay for the rest of his life. Not only am I going to secure him, I'm also going to secure the asset, so that in the event of he is not performing, I at least have got a basic asset that I can take in the event of him not performing. But I'm still going to keep him responsible. And that is exactly what they do. So they give you the money. Now, remember, it's not money that they had. It's money that was created. But in return for that, they literally keep the title deed. And the moment that they've got the title deed, they've got the control over this property. And therefore, you're going to become the slave of that property basically for the rest of your life. Or at least till you've paid it, which in most cases will be more than 20 years. Now, let's look at some of the values that's attached to a property and that we can easily identify. The first one is the slave value. And I'll get into that a little bit later on. Then there's a property value, or the bare dominium. In other words, we can see that a property has got 2 values attached within that. The bare dominium, the property value, and the, let's call it the use of frac, or the income or the interest value, at least to the bank. Then there's something else that we call the standard of living value. In other words, if you stay in a house, it's the same as if you are paying rent, or if you're renting a place, that is the standard of living value of that place. In other words, some people pay a very high premium in order to stay in a place that is above their means. In other words, try to impress other people, and therefore they rent a place where they have to pay 50 to 60% of the income, instead of buying a house where they can go to a maximum of only 30%. That is what I mean simply with the standard of living value. But then there's another value that very few people understand, and that's the investment value. So the investment value is what we call the intrinsic value. Now there's something else, we call it the financial freedom value. Now the financial freedom value is going to give you your financial freedom growth rate. So unless you know how to determine that, be careful. But there's something else that we call the margin of safety value. So when I personally buy a property, I want to make sure that I buy into the margin of safety. And the margin of safety is actually a value that is greater than my financial freedom value. So when I buy a property, I'm not going to go for the financial freedom growth rate like way back in '87, when my financial freedom growth rate was 55%. I actually bought my first property in the margin of safety, with a margin of safety value of 74%, because things can go wrong. And unless we know how to mitigate that, we've got a serious problem. And this is what I refer to when I say that people do stuff and they've got no flippant idea what it is that they actually do. So let me take you through a very, very quick example and try to show you just very easy. And I'm using this as an example in my seminar. Right. Say, for example, you want R1,000,000 property, and the assumption that I'm going to make is simply that you're going to earn this additional, because most people, when they buy a property, they look at their current budget, and then based on that, and they forget the most important part, which is the tax implication. Because if I am going to lift my standard of living, it means that I'm going to lift my marginal rate. In other words, I'm going to move into a next marginal rate, which means that for that scale that I'm going to be in, I'm going to pay more tax. Okay, so I'm going to use this in the example just to try to explain something quickly to you. So I'm borrowing a million. The banks give me clearance on that and say that's fine. Then I ask them, okay, what's the interest rate? They say 10%. I say, okay, and what's the repayments over how many years? They say 20 years, and it's going to be something like 9,650 Rand. So that simply means that for the next year, I'll have to earn at least 115,000 Rand additional that I have to give to the bank. Okay, so at the end of the year, I simply ask them, okay, and what interest did I pay? They come back to me and say, you gave us 115,000 Rand additional. Out of that 115,000 that you gave us, 102,000 was interest, and 12,000 Rand, more or less, a little bit more, 12,800 Rand, was the capital. In other words, you've paid 89% interest. But that's not really the truth, because if we look at the sweat equity, in other words, how much had I had to earn additional, we're going to find a different story. Because then, if I take tax into consideration, because we pay the property with after-tax money. So if I want to earn this additional in terms of sweat equity, I have to earn 16,300 Rand additional. At a 41% marginal rate, it means that I'm going to pay SARS 6,700 out of that 16,000 Rand in order to have 9,600 Rand, which I can use then to pay the bank. And then they split it. So in other words, if we're going to do a breakdown over a year period, we're going to find that I have to earn approximately 196,000 Rand additional, of which 102,000 goes to one system, about 80,000 to another system. That leaves me with 12,000 Rand. And then I'm forgetting about the tax and the levies and the rates and taxes and stuff like that. So we need to be very, very careful, and unless we're going to have a system, there is absolutely no ways that you'll be able to calculate the intrinsic value or what we call the IRR, in other words, the internal rate of return. And by the way, in property, the internal rate of return equals the investment growth rate. And we know by now that we need to know our financial freedom growth rate and then make sure that our investment growth rate is bigger than that. So if you cannot calculate, as an example, the IRR, the internal rate of return, which is an investment growth rate, there's absolute no ways that you'll know if that property is a good or a bad property. And yet I see that thousands and millions of people around the world get into property investments, listen to gurus. And then here in South Africa, it's mind-freaking-boggling. They listen to people from England and people from America, where there's a completely different set of rules. And they think that that applies here in South Africa, which of course it does not. And therefore, people are burning their fingers big, big time. And why? They never took the responsibility to take this thing serious and really understand what this asset class really is. So let's look at your challenge for today. The first thing that I want to do is, do you know your IGR? And is your IGR on all your properties bigger than your FFGR? If it's not, then find out. That's the challenge for today. Find out what is your investment growth rate in your property, in other words, your IRR in your property over a 5-year term at least. So here's how to take action right now in order to start and get this process going. First of all, calculate your internal rate of return, your IGR. By now I know that you know your FFGR, your financial freedom growth rate. And the question simply is, on your properties, each and every property that you've got or that you want to buy, is your IGR bigger than your FFGR? If it is not, then back to the drawing board, because it simply means that you do not understand this asset class. And you cannot buy into that, move on to the next one. That's as simple as that. So in closing, always remember that in order to create financial freedom, you must make sure that today is going to be a perfect day. And that simply means that there will never be a day in your life that's not going to require you to take the responsibility. In other words, to understand that you're going to do before you actually do it. Because in property, you make your money before you buy. And with a business, you also make your money when you invest, not when you sell. You must have the intent. You must know exactly what it is and why you do what you're going to do. You must be willing to put in the time and the effort. You must have the right mindsets and the willingness to actually open up and to learn. And then you have to take massive action. Consistently doing that needs to be done is the only way for you to get to where you want. That is financial freedom. So with property, unless your investment growth rate is going to be higher than your financial freedom growth rate, forget it. You're not going to make it, and that property is going to be, well, it's going to be a stumble block in your life. So it means that each and every action and each and every thought that you've got today is going to take you either one step closer to or one step away from financial freedom. Therefore, if you really want to be financially free, I challenge you to figure out and to understand the asset class before you actually invest in it. As always, if you've got any comments, suggestions or questions regarding today's lesson or financial freedom, please post it in the comment box and I'll come back if I can help. Also remember to subscribe to my blog, that is blog.honestdreyer.com, if you're not already on it and you want more information and tips and strategies on financial freedom. And then yes, feedback regarding my heart rate challenge. I've done what I was supposed to do, as you can see. And then please share this video with other people if you think that it can help them. And I've really enjoyed making this. And I've really only touched on the property side of stuff. If you want more information regarding this, you can phone the office or you can check my different websites regarding my property investment courses. It is something that I will strongly advise you to perhaps look into and really take that serious before you start investing into this asset class. So the U in the R.U.L.E.R.S acronym stands for understand, and I've made it my mission and it's a passion of mine as well, from 1987 to understand only two asset classes. Well, actually three. The one is I see myself as an asset, and therefore I've invested seriously about putting in the time and the effort and taking responsibility and changing the mindset and taking massive action into my own personal education and development. The second class of asset that I'm really passionate about and that I understand and that I put a lot of time in to understand even better is property. And the third one, of course, is business, and that is a different class. That, by the way, is the most fascinating thing, especially if you apply the wealth creator strategy to it, because you can literally start generating income, a surplus with no security, with nothing, and with about 2 weeks of, let's call it, competency building, in other words, skill building, nowadays with the internet. So with that, I hope that you enjoyed this. I've really enjoyed this. I'll see you then tomorrow.